You ever have that moment where you think you've got everything under control? Like, you've built your life up with careful precision, each piece fitting perfectly into place. That was me, 38, solid career, beautiful wife, decent house. No kids yet, but we had plans. Or at least I thought we did. But it turns out, when the cracks start to show, it's like watching your carefully constructed life crumble down to nothing, piece by piece. I'm Dan, by the way. Been married to Rachel for about 10 years. We met in college, the typical story. She was the bright-eyed girl who always seemed to have the right answer in class, and I was the guy who made lame jokes just to get her to laugh. Somehow, it worked, and we ended up together. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but overall, I thought we were solid. I thought she was my forever. I work in IT, managing a team of engineers at a big firm in the city. It's a demanding job, but it pays well, and it's given us a comfortable life. Rachel, on the other hand, has always been a bit of a free spirit. She dabbles in a lot of things: photography, painting, even tried her hand at writing at one point. But nothing really stuck, you know? I used to admire that about her, how she could flit from one passion to another without any real consequence. But as the years went by, I started to wonder if maybe she was just restless, always looking for the next big thing. A couple of months ago, something changed. Rachel started acting different. It was subtle at first, small things that didn't quite add up. She'd stay out later than usual, claiming she was at some art show or meeting a friend for drinks. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's always had her own social circle, and I've never been the type to question her every move. But then there were the phone calls. Late at night, she'd step outside to take them, her voice hushed and secretive. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off, saying it was just her sister or a friend going through a tough time. But the real kicker? It was how she started dressing. Rachel's always been stylish, but suddenly she was putting in way more effort than usual. New clothes, new perfume, stuff she hadn't cared about in years. She'd spend hours in front of the mirror, getting ready to run errands or grab coffee with a friend. It was like she was gearing up for something or someone. The sex, too, became more infrequent, and when it did happen, it felt off. Like she was just going through the motions. I didn't want to admit it to myself at first, but the signs were all there. I'd seen this play out in other people's lives, friends who'd gone through messy divorces, but I never thought it would happen to me. You never do, until it does. Still, I tried to push the doubts aside. I mean, Rachel was my wife. We'd been through so much together: job changes, family drama, even the loss of a pregnancy a few years back. That one hit us both hard, but we got through it. Or at least, I thought we did. Now, I'm not so sure. There was one person, though, who I couldn't shake from the back of my mind. My boss, Greg. The guy's a total douche, but he's got that charm that some women fall for. He's smooth, always knowing what to say and how to say it. He'd flirt with anything in a skirt, but I never thought Rachel would fall for it. Hell, I didn't even think she liked the guy. But lately, it seemed like she was spending more time at my office, dropping by unannounced or suddenly interested in the company parties she used to avoid. It wasn't until last week that I started putting two and two together. I was working late, trying to finish up a project when I got a text from Rachel. Heading out with the girls. Don't wait up. Seemed innocent enough, but something about it felt off. Call it a gut feeling or whatever, but I decided to finish up early and head home. But instead of going straight there, I made a detour. I drove by the bar she mentioned. Sure enough, her car was there, parked right out front. But when I walked inside, she was nowhere to be seen. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the doubt was gnawing at me. So, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through her phone. I know, total breach of trust. But I couldn't help it. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if there was something more going on. And that's when I saw it, a message from Greg, my boss. Can't wait to see you tonight. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. There it was, in black and white. The confirmation of everything I'd been afraid of. My wife was cheating on me, with my boss, no less. The anger, the betrayal, it all hit me at once, like a wave crashing over my head. I wanted to confront her, to scream and demand answers, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed to know more, to see how deep this rabbit hole went. So, I decided to play it cool. Pretend I didn't know anything. But inside, I was burning up, planning my next move. Because one thing was for sure, I wasn't going to let this slide. Not by a long shot. It's funny how your mind works and you're hurtling down the road toward inevitable disaster. There I was, sitting on this bombshell of information, knowing full well that my wife was screwing around with my boss. And yet, all I could think about was how to catch them in the act, like seeing it with my own eyes would somehow make it real, undeniable. Maybe part of me was hoping it wasn't true, that I'd find them together and it would be some huge misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. After finding that text, I spent the next few days in a haze, pretending like everything was normal while planning my next move. Rachel acted the same as always, completely oblivious to the fact that her little secret wasn't so secret anymore. The late nights, the sudden interest in girls' nights out, they all started to click together, painting a picture I wished I could unsee. Then, it happened. The opportunity one didn't know I was waiting for. It was a Friday evening, and Rachel had mentioned she was heading out with her so-called friends again. This time, I didn't bother asking where or when she'd be back. Instead, I waited until she left, then I followed her. Yeah, I know it's the kind of thing you see in movies, the suspicious husband tailing his wife, but I didn't care. I needed to know for sure. She drove out of town, heading toward the coast. We live close enough to the beach that it wasn't out of the ordinary for us to go there, but this was different. She wasn't taking the usual route to the crowded areas where families and tourists hang out. No, she was heading toward the secluded spots, the ones where nobody goes after dark unless they're looking for privacy. My heart pounded in my chest as I trailed behind her, keeping my distance but close enough to see where she was going. Finally, she pulled off the road, parking in one of those little gravel lots that are practically hidden from view. I parked a ways back, killing my headlights and watching as she got out of the car. My pulse was racing as I watched her move toward the beach, her figure barely visible in the dimming light. And then, I saw him, Greg, my boss, already waiting for her. The bastard. They met like it was the most natural thing in the world, like they'd done this 100 times before. She smiled at him, that same smile she used to give me, and something inside me snapped. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with it for a moment before I managed to get the camera on. I wasn't thinking clearly, just running on pure instinct. Part of me wanted to storm over there and beat the shit out of Greg right then and there, but another part of me wanted proof. Proof that would leave no room for denial or excuses. Proof that I could shove in Rachel's face when she tried to lie her way out of it. They walked down to the beach, hand in hand, oblivious to the world around them. I followed at a distance, careful not to make any noise. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. The beach was deserted, the waves crashing softly in the background as they moved closer to the water's edge. And then, without any hesitation, they started undressing. I felt like I was going to be sick, watching my wife peel off her clothes for another man. The same man who sat in meetings with me, who slapped me on the back and called me his right-hand man. The betrayal was like a physical pain in my chest, but I forced myself to keep watching, to keep filming. Greg pulled Rachel into his arms, kissing her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I wanted to look away, to just turn and leave, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the screen of my phone as I filmed them, their bodies illuminated by the moonlight as they moved together on the sand. They fucked right there on the beach, in the open, like they didn't have a care in the world. Rachel moaned, the sound carried by the wind, and it made me want to throw my phone into the ocean and walk away from it all. But I didn't. I filmed every second, every thrust, every kiss. I wanted her to know that I saw it all, that I knew exactly what kind of person she had become. When they were done, they lay there for a while, tangled together in the sand. I stayed hidden, my rage building with every passing second. Eventually, they started getting dressed, laughing softly like a couple of teenagers who'd just gotten away with something naughty. But they hadn't gotten away with shit. I waited until Greg was pulling his shirt back on before I made my move. The anger inside me had reached a boiling point, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I walked out from behind the rocks where I'd been hiding, my footsteps heavy on the sand. "Nice night for a walk, don't you think?" I said, my voice low and menacing. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me. Greg turned slowly, confusion etched on his face until recognition set in. And then, fear. "Dan," Rachel started, but I cut her off. "Shut the fuck up, Rachel," I snarled, not even looking at her. My eyes were locked on Greg, who was starting to back away, realizing too late that he was about to be in a world of hurt. "You've got some nerve, Greg," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Fucking my wife? Really?" "Dan, I can explain," Greg stammered, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I didn't give him a chance to finish. I lunged at him, all the anger and betrayal I'd been holding back exploding in that moment. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact sending him stumbling back. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for the fury driving me. I hit him again, and again, each punch fueled by the images still fresh in my mind of him with Rachel. He went down hard, landing in the sand with a thud. But I wasn't done. I straddled him, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him up just to slam him back down again. Blood was pouring from his nose, his eyes dazed as he tried to shield his face from the blows. "Dan, stop! You're going to kill him!" Rachel screamed, but her voice barely registered. All I could see was Greg's face, the smug expression he always wore now twisted in pain and fear. I wanted to kill him. I really did. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I had to stop. I couldn't throw my whole life away for this piece of shit, no matter how much he deserved it. With a final punch, I let go of him, standing up and stepping back, breathing heavily as I looked down at the bloody mess on the sand. Greg groaned, barely conscious, and I spat on the ground next to him. "You're fired," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the night air. Rachel was crying, her hands trembling as she knelt next to Greg, trying to help him sit up. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't feel any pity for her. She was the reason all of this had happened, and she'd have to live with the consequences. I turned on my heel, walking back toward my car, leaving them both there on the beach. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but one thing was certain, I was done with Rachel. And I was going to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I drove home that night, my knuckles still aching from the beating I'd given Greg. My mind was a blur, the adrenaline from the fight slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a seething anger that refused to die down. I had just witnessed my wife's betrayal in the most visceral way possible, and the reality of it was starting to settle in. But I wasn't done yet. There was still Rachel to deal with, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook easily. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for the explosion that was about to happen. I paced the living room, my mind racing, trying to figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to confront her when she walked through that door. But no amount of rehearsing could prepare me for the tidal wave of emotions that hit me the moment she stepped inside. Rachel came home about an hour later. She must have driven back in a panic because her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying the entire way. Good. She deserved to cry, to feel every bit of pain she had inflicted on me. She walked in slowly, like she was stepping into a minefield, her gaze flicking around the room until it landed on me. I was standing by the fireplace, arms crossed, the phone still in my hand, the video of her and Greg saved and ready to be played back if she dared to deny it. "Dan, please," she started, her voice trembling, but I cut her off before she could even begin her excuses. "Don't," I snapped, my voice cold and hard. Don't you fucking dare try to weasel your way out of this. I saw everything, Rachel. Everything. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, as if the force of my words had physically hit her. She opened her mouth to say something, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more lies. You think I'm stupid? You think I didn't notice the late nights, the girls' nights out? I spat the words at her, each one laced with venom. You've been fucking Greg behind my back, haven't you? Rachel's face crumpled, and she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. Dan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Sorry? You're sorry? I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. You're sorry you got caught, that's what you are. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, her eyes pleading. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It just happened. We didn't plan it, I swear. Bullshit, I snapped, my anger flaring up again. Don't give me that, it just happened, crap. You made a choice, Rachel. You chose to fuck my boss. You chose to betray me. She flinched at the harshness of my words, but I didn't care. She needed to hear this, to understand the depth of the pain she had caused. How long? I demanded, stepping closer to her. How long has this been going on? Rachel hesitated, and that hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. A few months. Months? I roared, the full weight of her betrayal hitting me like a sledgehammer. You've been lying to me for months? Sneaking around, fucking him while I'm busting my ass at work, while I'm trying to give us a good life? She sobbed harder, her whole body shaking as she tried to find the words, but there was nothing she could say that would make any of this better. It didn't mean anything, she choked out. It was just sex, Dan. I didn't love him. Just sex? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You threw away our marriage, our life together, for just sex. Do you even hear yourself right now? She shook her head, her sobs growing louder, but I was beyond caring. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted more than anyone in this world, had reduced our relationship to nothing more than a series of lies and deceit. What the hell were you thinking, Rachel? Huh? Did you think I wouldn't find out? That you could just keep sneaking around behind my back like I'm some kind of idiot? My voice was shaking with rage, and I could feel my control slipping, the urge to break something, to scream, boiling just under the surface. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I never wanted this to happen. Well, it did. I shouted, unable to keep the anger from exploding out of me. You did this, Rachel. You destroyed us. And for what? Some cheap thrill? Some asshole who doesn't give a damn about you? Rachel collapsed into sobs, and for a brief moment, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. She was finally feeling some of the pain she had caused me, finally understanding the consequences of her actions. But that satisfaction was short-lived, drowned out by the overwhelming sadness and betrayal that consumed me. Why, Rachel? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why him? Why Greg? She didn't answer right away, just sat there on the floor, her shoulders shaking as she cried. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. I don't know, she whispered. I was lonely. You were always working. I felt like you didn't care about me anymore. Didn't care? I repeated, incredulous. Everything I've done has been for you, for us. I've been working my ass off to give you the life you wanted, the life we both wanted. I know, she said, her voice small and broken. But somewhere along the way, I felt like we were drifting apart. And Greg, he was there, he listened to me, he made me feel wanted. Her words were like knives, each one stabbing deeper into the wound. And I didn't? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't enough for you? That's not it, she cried, shaking her head. You are enough, Dan, you are. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. Please, please, forgive me. Forgive her? After everything? The audacity of her plea made my blood boil. Forgive you? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. You think I can just forgive you for this? That we can just go back to the way things were? I'll do anything, she begged, crawling toward me on her knees. Please, Dan, don't leave me. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I looked down at her, at the woman who had been my partner, my lover, my wife. And all I saw was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized, someone who had ripped my heart out and stomped on it without a second thought. There's no making this right, Rachel, I said, my voice cold and final. You've destroyed everything we had. Everything I thought we were. She sobbed harder, her hands clutching at my legs, but I pushed her away, unable to stand the sight of her any longer. I need you to leave, I said, stepping back. Pack your things and go. I can't be around you right now. Dan, please, she pleaded, but I turned away, refusing to let her see the tears that were threatening to fall. Go, Rachel, I repeated, my voice hard. And don't come back. She hesitated, but finally, she got up and stumbled toward the stairs, her sobs echoing through the empty house. I stood there in the living room, my hands clenched into fists, my body trembling with the effort to keep it together. This was it. The end of everything I had known, everything I had loved. And as the door slammed shut behind her, I felt a wave of emptiness wash over me, a void where my heart used to be. But even in that emptiness, one thought burned bright and clear: I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Rachel might have destroyed our marriage, but she wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. She was going to pay for what she had done, and so was Greg. This was just the beginning. The house was empty after Rachel left, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating, filled with echoes of memories that were now tainted by betrayal. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the walls, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But there was no making sense of it. The woman I had devoted a decade of my life to had stabbed me in the back, and the life we'd built together was in ruins. But I wasn't about to let her walk away from this mess like it was nothing. No, Rachel was going to feel every ounce of pain she had caused me. She was going to know what it felt like to have everything you care about ripped away. I wasn't sure where to start at first, but as I sat there, the anger simmering inside me, a plan began to take shape. Rachel had left most of her things behind in her rush to get out of the house. I knew she'd be back to get them, but I wasn't planning to make it easy for her. I wanted her to feel unwelcome, to know she had lost her place in this home, my home now. I started with her clothes. One by one, I pulled every item of clothing she owned out of the closet, throwing them into trash bags. The designer dresses, the fancy shoes, the expensive handbags, everything went into the bags without a second thought. It wasn't enough just to pack them up. No, I needed to do more. I dragged the bags out to the backyard and set them on the ground, my heart pounding in my chest as I doused them with lighter fluid. I paused for a moment, looking down at the pile of her belongings, all the material things she had cared so much about. Then, without hesitation, I struck a match and tossed it onto the pile. The flames caught quickly, roaring to life as they devoured everything she had left behind. As I watched the fire burn, the satisfaction was immediate and intense. It was like watching the physical manifestation of my anger, my hurt, my betrayal, all going up in flames. The smoke curled up into the night sky, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Rachel's reaction when she found out. She'd be devastated, and that was exactly what I wanted. Next, I turned my attention to her car. It was still parked in the driveway, a sleek, silver BMW that I had paid for, of course. Rachel had been so proud of that car, always bragging about it to her friends. But now it was just another reminder of her betrayal. I grabbed a baseball bat from the garage, the cold metal feeling heavy in my hands as I walked over to the car. The first swing was the hardest, the impact jarring up my arms as the bat connected with the windshield, shattering the glass into a spiderweb of cracks. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I swung again and again, the bat smashing through windows, denting the body, wrecking the car beyond recognition. By the time I was done, I was breathing heavily, my hands raw from gripping the bat, but the car was a total wreck. I stepped back, surveying the damage with a sense of grim satisfaction. Rachel would have to see this. She would have to know that I wasn't going to let her walk away from what she'd done. She was going to pay, in every way I could think of. But I wasn't done yet. Rachel had been obsessed with appearances, always concerned with how we looked to the outside world. She had cultivated this image of us as the perfect couple, the ones with the picture-perfect marriage. I was going to shatter that image, just like I'd shattered her car windows. I logged into our joint social media accounts, something we'd set up years ago to share photos and updates with family and friends. Rachel had always been the one to manage the accounts, posting carefully curated snapshots of our life together. But now it was my turn. I started with a single post, a photo of the charred remains of her clothes in the backyard, the flames still flickering in the background. The caption was simple: sometimes you have to burn it all down to start over. I hit post and watched as the likes and comments started pouring in, the confusion and concern from friends and family evident in every response. I didn't care. This was just the beginning. I was done hiding what she had done. I wanted the whole world to know who Rachel really was. Next, I posted the video. The one I'd taken of her and Greg on the beach. I didn't edit it, didn't blur their faces. I wanted everyone to see exactly what had happened. The title? Truth Exposed. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, my phone was blowing up with notifications, messages, calls, comments, all of it. People were horrified, shocked, some even disgusted. But I didn't care. Let them be. Rachel deserved every bit of this public humiliation. She had betrayed me in the most personal, intimate way possible, and now she was going to face the consequences. Rachel tried to call me several times, but I ignored every call, every message. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses, her apologies. It was too late for that. The last message she sent before I blocked her was a desperate plea: please, Dan, take it down. Don't do this. Let's talk. But I wasn't interested in talking. Rachel had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it, alone. I knew that posting the video might have legal repercussions, but in that moment, I didn't care. I wanted her to hurt as much as I was hurting. I wanted her to feel the shame, the guilt, the loss. This was just the start of her downfall, and I was going to make sure it was a long, painful fall. After posting the video, I deleted all the accounts. Every trace of our perfect life together was gone in a matter of minutes. Rachel would have no way of reaching out to anyone through those channels anymore. She was effectively cut off, isolated, just like she had made me feel. As the night wore on, I sat in the darkened living room, the glow of the fire outside slowly dying down, replaced by the cold, empty night. I thought about everything Rachel had destroyed with her lies, her deceit, and I knew there was no going back. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. This was only the beginning of her suffering. There were still more steps to take, more ways to make her pay. She had destroyed our marriage, our life together, but she hadn't destroyed me. And I was going to make sure she knew that. She might have been the one to betray me, but I was going to be the one who came out on top. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my sense of self. Rachel had taken that from me, but now it was time to take it back. And as I sat there, the anger still simmering inside me, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the fire in the backyard had long since died out, leaving only a pile of smoldering ashes where Rachel's belongings used to be. But the fire inside me was still burning strong. I wasn't done, far from it. Rachel had been dealt with, but there was still one more person who needed to feel the full force of my wrath: Greg. The smug son of a bitch had not only betrayed me by sleeping with my wife, but he'd also done it with the arrogance of someone who thought he'd never get caught. Well, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I started with his wife, Jessica. Greg was the kind of guy who liked to keep his professional and personal lives separate, but I knew enough about him to know that he had a wife and 2 kids. They lived in a nice suburban home, the kind of place where everyone pretends they've got it all together. I wondered how many times Greg had smiled at me across the boardroom table, knowing full well he was screwing my wife behind my back. It didn't take much to find Jessica on social media. She was one of those women who documented every aspect of her life online: pictures of the kids, family vacations, even the occasional photo of her and Greg looking like the perfect couple. It made me sick to my stomach to think about how easily he had been living this double life. I didn't bother with a subtle approach. I downloaded the video of Greg and Rachel, the same one I'd posted online, and sent it to Jessica in a private message. The subject line was simple: "You deserve to know the truth." I knew it would hit her like a ton of bricks, shattering the illusion of the perfect life she thought she had. I could only imagine the look on her face when she opened that message, the horror, the betrayal. But it wasn't just about hurting her, it was about exposing Greg for the lying, cheating bastard he was. He'd destroyed my life, and now I was going to destroy his. But I didn't stop there. Oh no, Greg had a lot more to lose than just his marriage, and I was going to make sure everyone in his world knew exactly what kind of man he really was. I compiled a list of every colleague, business associate, and higher-up I could think of who worked with Greg. The guy had made a lot of connections over the years, and his career was built on a carefully crafted image of success and respectability. But that image was about to come crashing down. One by one, I sent the video to each of them: his boss, his subordinates, even a few clients I knew he was trying to impress. The subject line for these emails was even simpler: Greg's true colors. The moment I hit send, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the final nail in the coffin of Greg's reputation. He'd worked so hard to build his career, to climb the corporate ladder, and now it was all going to crumble around him. There was no coming back from this. I could only imagine the chaos that would ensue once the video started making the rounds at the office. Greg was respected, even admired by some, but that was about to change. His colleagues would see him for what he really was: a man who couldn't keep it in his pants, who thought he was above the rules. The fallout was swift. By mid-morning, my phone was buzzing with messages from people at the office, some in shock, others disgusted, all of them wanting to know if the video was real. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. The video spoke for itself, and Greg's reputation was already in tatters. It wasn't long before word started spreading beyond the office. The video went viral within our professional circles, spreading like wildfire. People who had once admired Greg were now distancing themselves from him, his name becoming synonymous with scandal and disgrace. It wasn't just his colleagues who were talking, it was everyone: friends, acquaintances, even people who didn't know him personally but had heard of his so-called success. But the real blow came when I sent the video to the corporate higher-ups, those who were responsible for the company's image and reputation. I knew how seriously they took these things, how important it was for them to maintain a pristine public face. A scandal like this would be devastating, not just for Greg, but for the company as well. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout to reach Greg. By the end of the day, he was placed on indefinite leave pending an investigation. The company couldn't afford to have someone like him associated with them, not with the video making the rounds. His career was effectively over, and it was all his own doing. I could only imagine what was happening in Greg's life at that moment. Jessica had probably confronted him, and if there was any justice in the world, she'd already be packing her bags, taking the kids and leaving him to rot. The thought of him sitting alone in that big, empty house, knowing that he had lost everything, filled me with a grim sense of satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more group of people who needed to see the video: Greg's so-called friends. The guys he played golf with on weekends, the ones who thought he was living the dream. I wanted them to know the truth too, to see the real Greg behind the facade. I sent the video to all of them, each with a personal message: "This is the man you call a friend." By the time I was done, I knew there was no way Greg could recover from this. His marriage was over, his career was in ruins, and his social circle had turned against him. He had nothing left, just like me. But unlike him, I hadn't brought this on myself. He had. And now he was paying the price. As the day turned into night, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The rage that had been boiling inside me for so long was finally starting to subside, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I had done what I set out to do. Rachel and Greg had both betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now they were both facing the consequences of their actions. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of control. Rachel and Greg had thought they could destroy me, but I had turned the tables on them. I was still standing, and they were the ones who had been brought to their knees. I knew that this wasn't the end of the story. There would be fallout, legal consequences, maybe even more drama to come. But for now, I didn't care. I had done what needed to be done, and I had no regrets. As I sat in the darkened living room, the glow of the computer screen casting shadows on the walls, I thought about what came next. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready for it. I had been through hell and back, and I wasn't about to let anyone, least of all Rachel or Greg, dictate my future. The game was over, and I had won. But there was one more thing I needed to do, a final confrontation that would put an end to this chapter of my life once and for all. It was time to meet Rachel face to face, to have that last conversation, and to decide what came next. Whether it was closure or something else entirely, I needed to see her one more time. And I was going to make sure she knew exactly what she had lost. I knew it was time to confront Rachel about the inevitable divorce. After everything that had happened, there was no way we could pretend that our marriage was salvageable. The betrayal had cut too deep, the trust shattered beyond repair. I needed to face her one last time, to put an end to this chapter of our lives and move on. I texted Rachel that morning, telling her to meet me at the house. The place where everything had started and where everything would now end. I wanted this conversation to happen in person, not over the phone or through some impersonal legal document. I needed to look her in the eye, to see the woman who had destroyed our life together, and to tell her it was over. Rachel arrived in the early afternoon. When I saw her car pull into the driveway, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of finality. I had once loved this woman more than anything, but now all I saw was the person who had torn my life apart. She stepped out of the car, her face pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usually perfect appearance now disheveled and raw. But I didn't feel any sympathy for her. Whatever she was going through, she had brought it on herself. I opened the door before she could knock, and we stood there for a moment, just staring at each other. The silence between us was heavy, loaded with all the unspoken words, the hurt, the betrayal. Finally, I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked past me into the living room, the same room where we had once shared so many happy memories. But those memories felt like a lifetime ago, and the room itself felt cold, empty, a shell of what it used to be. Rachel turned to face me, her eyes pleading, but I held up a hand to stop her before she could start with whatever apology or excuse she had prepared. "Let's not drag this out," I said, my voice firm. "We both know why we're here." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I know. Dan, I'm so sorry." "Stop," I interrupted, my tone cold. "I don't want to hear it. Your apologies don't mean anything to me anymore, Rachel. You made your choices, and now we have to deal with the consequences." She flinched at the harshness in my voice, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. I had to stay strong, had to see this through to the end. "I want a divorce," I said bluntly, the words hanging in the air between us. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step toward me, her hands outstretched like she wanted to reach for me, to close the distance between us. But I took a step back, keeping that distance firmly in place. Dan, please. Don't do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, we can fix this. Fix this? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. There's nothing left to fix, Rachel. You destroyed it. You destroyed us. She started to cry, her tears flowing freely now, but I didn't let it sway me. I had seen her cry before, had been moved by her tears in the past, but now they just felt manipulative, like a last-ditch effort to get me to change my mind. But my mind was made up. I gave you everything, Rachel, I said, my voice low but filled with emotion. I trusted you, loved you, built a life with you. And you threw it all away for what? A fling with my boss? It wasn't like that, she sobbed, shaking her head. I was lonely, Dan. You were always working, always busy, and I felt like I was losing you. Losing me? I echoed, my anger flaring up again. You didn't lose me, Rachel. I was right here, working to provide for us, for our future. But instead of talking to me, instead of telling me how you felt, you went behind my back and slept with Greg. I know, she cried, her voice breaking. I made a horrible mistake, the worst mistake of my life. But please, Dan, don't throw everything away because of it. We can start over, we can. There is no starting over, I cut in, my voice harsh. There's no going back from this. I can't trust you, Rachel. I can't even look at you without seeing what you did. Her sobs grew louder, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was hard to watch, but I forced myself to stay strong, to keep my resolve. I've already talked to a lawyer, I continued, my tone matter of fact. The papers are being drawn up. All you have to do is sign them. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide with shock and fear. No, Dan, please. You can't do this. We've been through so much together. We can't just end it like this. It's already ended, I said quietly. It ended the moment you decided to sleep with Greg. You broke our marriage, Rachel, not me. But I love you, she cried, desperation in her voice. I love you so much, Dan. Please, don't do this. I'll do anything to make it right, anything to get you to forgive me. Love? I scoffed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You don't love me, Rachel. If you did, you wouldn't have done what you did. You wouldn't have betrayed me like this. She shook her head frantically, trying to reach for me again, but I stepped back once more, keeping that emotional distance between us. Please, Dan. Don't leave me. I need you. I can't live without you. You should have thought about that before you fucked my boss, I said coldly, my words like ice. She crumpled to the floor, her sobs racking her body, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. There was nothing left between us but the ashes of what we once had. Sign the papers, Rachel, I said, my voice firm. Let's end this before we destroy each other even more. She didn't respond, just kept crying, her hands clutching at her hair as she rocked back and forth on the floor. I turned away from her, unable to watch any longer, and walked over to the table where I had placed the envelope containing the divorce papers. I'm leaving them here, I said, setting the envelope down on the table. Take your time, but know this, there's no coming back from this. Once you sign those papers, it's over. Completely. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with despair, but I didn't let it affect me. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. I'll be staying somewhere else for now, I continued, my voice calm and controlled. You can take whatever you need from the house, but after that, I want you gone. Her sobs quieted as she realized I was serious, that there was no more room for negotiation, no more chances. This was it, the end of our marriage, the end of everything we had built together. Dan. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice broken. So am I said quietly, the weight of everything we had lost settling on my shoulders. But it's too late for sorry. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her sitting there on the floor, her cries echoing through the empty house. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, the cold air hitting my face and clearing my mind. This was the right decision, the only decision. Rachel had made her choices, and now I was making mine. There was no future for us together, no way to rebuild what she had destroyed. The divorce would be painful, messy even, but it was necessary. It was the only way for me to move on, to reclaim my life and find some semblance of peace. As I drove away from the house, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore, nothing but the past, and I was done living in the past. The future was uncertain, but at least it was mine to shape, mine to control. And whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure: I was done being a victim. I was done letting Rachel and Greg define my life. This was the start of something new, something different. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. And that was enough for now. The days following that final conversation with Rachel were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and awkward encounters as we navigated the dissolution of our marriage. Every moment felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life, watching from the outside as everything I had known unraveled. I had left the house that night with no intention of returning until the divorce was finalized. I rented a small apartment downtown, a temporary place to stay while the dust settled. It wasn't much, just a furnished one-bedroom with the basics, but it was a place where I could think, where I could start to piece my life back together. Rachel's texts started coming in almost immediately after I left, filled with desperate pleas for reconciliation, apologies, and promises that she would do anything to fix things. But I had made my decision, and I didn't respond. I couldn't allow myself to be drawn back into the mess, not after everything that had happened. I forwarded her messages to my lawyer and blocked her number, needing to create that distance, that space to breathe. The legal process moved quickly, thanks to the evidence I had gathered and the prenup we had signed years ago. It was a straightforward case of infidelity, and my lawyer assured me that the courts would be on my side. There were no children involved, no shared businesses or complicated financial entanglements, which made things easier, at least from a legal standpoint. But emotionally, it was still a battle. Rachel's lawyer contacted mine, trying to negotiate better terms for her, arguing that she was emotionally fragile and deserved some form of compensation for her mistake. But my lawyer was relentless, refusing to give an inch. I had made it clear that I wanted a clean break, with no alimony and no ties to her beyond the division of our assets. Rachel had already taken enough from me, I wasn't about to let her take more. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I started to hear whispers from mutual friends, colleagues, even strangers on social media. The video of Rachel and Greg had made its way into circles far beyond what I had anticipated, and the fallout was severe. Rachel had been shunned by many of her friends, ostracized for what she had done. Greg, meanwhile, had disappeared completely, likely hiding from the shame and scandal that had enveloped him. But I didn't care about them. They were no longer my concern. My focus was on the future, on rebuilding my life from the ground up. One day, I received a call from my lawyer, Marcia. Her tone was more relaxed than usual, which immediately put me at ease. "Dan," she said, "I've got some good news for you." I sat up straighter, eager to hear what she had to say. "What is it?" "The divorce is finalized," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Rachel has signed the papers, and the judge has approved the terms. It's over." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had been holding my breath for so long, waiting for the other shoe to drop, that it took a moment for the news to really sink in. It was over. The marriage, the betrayal, the constant tension, it was all behind me now. What happens next? I asked, needing to know what the next steps were. "Well," Marcia replied, "you'll receive the final decree in the mail in a few days. After that, you're free and clear. No alimony, no further obligations. Rachel has been ordered to vacate the house within a week, and everything else is settled." I thanked Marcia, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The legal battle was over, and I had come out the other side. But it wasn't just the end of the marriage, it was the end of the life I had known for so many years. And as I hung up the phone, I realized that now, more than ever, I needed to figure out what came next. The next few days were a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of freedom, of liberation from the constant anxiety and anger that had consumed me for so long. But on the other hand, there was a deep sadness, a mourning for the life I had lost, even if it was a life built on lies. I returned to the house one last time, after Rachel had left, to collect a few belongings and to say goodbye. The place felt different now, empty and lifeless, like it had been drained of all its warmth and happiness. The memories of our life together were still there, haunting the walls and the rooms, but they felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I walked through the house slowly, letting the memories wash over me one last time. The kitchen where we had cooked dinner together, laughing and joking like nothing could ever come between us. The living room where we had spent countless nights watching movies, curled up on the couch. The bedroom where we had shared our most intimate moments, now a cold, empty space. I ended up in the backyard, standing over the spot where I had burned Rachel's clothes, where the ashes had long since been swept away by the wind. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, everything we had built together had been reduced to ashes, scattered to the winds of time. There was nothing left to hold on to. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs, and then exhaled slowly, releasing the last remnants of my anger, my hurt, my sadness. This chapter of my life was over, and it was time to move on. I left the house without looking back, locking the door behind me and handing the keys over to the real estate agent who would handle the sale. The house would go on the market, and soon enough, someone else would move in, filling the empty rooms with new memories, new life. As I drove away, I felt a sense of closure, of finality. The past was behind me now, and the future was wide open. It was up to me to decide what to do with it, how to rebuild, how to find happiness again. Over the next few weeks, I focused on self-care, on healing. I started going to the gym more regularly, taking care of my body in a way I hadn't in years. I met with a therapist, someone who could help me process everything that had happened, someone who could guide me through the healing process. It wasn't easy, but with each session, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. I also reconnected with friends I had lost touch with over the years, reaching out to those who had been there for me in the past but whom I had drifted away from during my marriage. It was a strange feeling, stepping back into social circles that I had once been so comfortable in, but it was also liberating. I wasn't the same person I had been before, but that was okay. I was learning to embrace the new version of myself, the one who had survived betrayal and come out the other side. And then there was work. With Greg out of the picture, there was a shift in the office dynamic, a sense of uncertainty as people adjusted to the new normal. But I threw myself into my job, taking on more responsibility, proving to myself and to everyone else that I was more than just a victim of circumstance. I was capable, strong, and ready to move forward. The final step in my healing process was something I had been avoiding for a while: forgiving myself. For a long time, I had blamed myself for what had happened, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, something that might have prevented Rachel from straying. But through therapy, and through my own introspection, I came to realize that it wasn't my fault. Rachel had made her choices, and those choices were a reflection of her, not me. Forgiving her was harder, but eventually, I reached a place where I could let go of the anger, the bitterness. Holding on to it would only keep me trapped in the past, and I was done living there. It didn't mean I excused what she had done, or that I would ever forget it. But it meant I could move on, unburdened by the weight of that betrayal. As the months passed, the divorce became a distant memory, something that had happened but no longer defined me. I was free, truly free, to live my life on my terms, to find happiness again, whether that was in a new relationship, new adventures, or simply in the quiet moments of solitude where I could reflect on how far I had come. One day, as I sat in a cafe, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the world go by, I realized that I had finally found peace. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine, and that was enough. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the calm. The months following the finalization of my divorce marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that was filled with uncertainty but also a sense of newfound freedom. For the first time in years, I was no longer tethered to the past, to the person I had once been. Instead, I was free to explore who I could become, unburdened by the weight of betrayal and heartache. At first, it was strange, living on my own in a small downtown apartment, far removed from the suburban life I had known. The quiet nights, the lack of routine, the absence of Rachel's presence, it all felt foreign, like I was navigating uncharted territory. But as time went on, I began to find comfort in the solitude, in the chance to rediscover myself without the constraints of a broken marriage. I threw myself into work, not as a distraction, but as a way to rebuild my sense of purpose. With Greg out of the picture, I found myself taking on more leadership roles, guiding my team through projects with a renewed sense of determination. My efforts didn't go unnoticed, and within a few months, I was promoted, stepping into a position that allowed me to shape the direction of our department. It was a validation that I had sorely needed, a reminder that I was capable and strong, despite everything I had been through. Outside of work, I made a conscious effort to reconnect with the world around me. I started attending social events again, accepting invitations to dinners, parties, and gatherings that I would have once declined. At first, it was awkward, stepping back into social circles that I had let slip away during my marriage. But the more I put myself out there, the more I realized how much I had missed, how much of life I had allowed to pass me by while I was wrapped up in the toxic relationship with Rachel. I also began to explore new hobbies, activities that I had always been curious about but never had the time or the motivation to pursue. I took up hiking, spending my weekends exploring the trails and mountains around the city. There was something therapeutic about being out in nature, about pushing my body to its limits and reaching new heights. Each hike felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was capable of overcoming obstacles, both physical and emotional. Photography became another passion. I bought a camera, something I had always wanted to do but had never justified the expense. Now, it felt like an investment in myself, in my future. I started taking photos of the places I visited, capturing moments of beauty and serenity that I could reflect on later. Photography allowed me to see the world through a different lens, to focus on the details that I had once overlooked. It became a way for me to document my journey, to create a visual record of the person I was becoming. But it wasn't just about work and hobbies. Slowly, cautiously, I began to open myself up to the possibility of new relationships. At first, it was just casual dates, dinners, and drinks with women I met through friends or at social events. I wasn't looking for anything serious. How could I, after everything that had happened? But I was curious, interested in exploring what it meant to connect with someone new, to see if I could trust again. One woman, in particular, stood out. Her name was Emily, and we met at a mutual friend's barbecue. She was smart, funny, and kind, qualities that I found myself drawn to almost immediately. Our conversations flowed easily, and there was an undeniable chemistry between us. But I was cautious, careful not to rush into anything too quickly. I had learned my lesson about jumping into relationships without fully understanding the person on the other side. Emily was patient, understanding of my need to take things slow. She had been through her own share of heartache, a divorce that had left her guarded but not closed off. We bonded over our shared experiences, over the understanding that we were both in the process of healing. Our relationship grew naturally, without pressure or expectations, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. But I knew that for this new relationship to work, I had to be honest with myself and with Emily. I couldn't let the shadows of my past continue to haunt me, couldn't let the betrayal I had experienced with Rachel dictate how I approached this new chapter of my life. So, I made a conscious effort to let go of the anger, the bitterness, the resentment. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but with each passing day, I felt those emotions loosening their grip on me. Therapy played a big role in this process. My therapist, Dr. Ellis, helped me navigate the complexities of moving on, of understanding that while I had been hurt, I didn't have to carry that pain with me forever. He encouraged me to focus on the future, on the possibilities that lay ahead, rather than dwelling on the past. Slowly, I began to internalize his advice, to believe that I was worthy of happiness, of love, of a life free from the scars of betrayal. As my relationship with Emily deepened, I found myself experiencing emotions that I hadn't felt in a long time: joy, excitement, contentment. We spent more time together, going on hikes, exploring the city, and simply enjoying each other's company. There were no games, no hidden agendas, just two people who had found comfort and companionship in each other. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset over the city, Emily turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about the future, Dan? About where we're headed?" Her question caught me off guard, but in a good way. I hadn't allowed myself to think too far ahead, to imagine what the future might hold. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't afraid to envision it. "I do," I replied, taking her hand in mine. "And I see us in it, Emily. I don't know where we'll end up, but I want to find out. Together." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that warmed my heart. "I'd like that too," she said, leaning in to kiss me. As our relationship continued to blossom, I found myself finally feeling at peace with my past. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me had been replaced by a quiet acceptance. Rachel was no longer a part of my life, but she had been a part of my journey, a chapter that I had closed but could still learn from. I began to see that my experience with Rachel, as painful as it had been, had taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and resilience. It had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, to understand the importance of communication and honesty in a relationship. And it had shown me that even in the face of betrayal, I was strong enough to rebuild, to find happiness again. As the seasons changed and the days grew longer, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I started volunteering at a local charity, using my skills to help those in need. It was a way for me to give back, to focus on something bigger than myself, and it brought me a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in a long time. My friendships deepened as well, as I reconnected with people I had lost touch with during my marriage. We shared laughs, stories, and memories, and I realized how much I had missed those connections. I made a promise to myself to never again let my relationships with friends and family fall by the wayside, to always nurture and cherish them. Emily became an integral part of my life, and as our relationship grew, so did our plans for the future. We talked about traveling, about exploring new places and experiencing new adventures together. We even started discussing the possibility of moving in together, of creating a home that was truly ours. But the most important change was internal. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own strength and resilience. I had learned that while life could throw unexpected challenges my way, I had the ability to overcome them, to grow from them. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city that had become my new home, I realized that I was happy, truly happy. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by the joy of the present and the hope of the future. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and in doing so, I had discovered a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I had learned that while betrayal could shatter your world, it didn't have to define you. You could pick up the pieces, rebuild, and emerge even stronger. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the city, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new and exciting chapter in my life. The future was filled with possibilities, and I was ready to embrace every single one of them. And as for Rachel? She was a part of my past, a chapter that had ended. I no longer felt anger or resentment toward her, just a sense of closure, of peace. I wished her well, wherever she was, but I was no longer defined by what had happened between us. I was free. And I was ready to live the life I had always deserved.